Hey friends, thanks for joining us for the fourth and final message in our Overtime series. If you haven't watched the other messages, I encourage you to visit our Facebook video collection or the video collection on our website. Pastor Mark has given us lots of good stuff to think about, and it's all an important part of this conversation that we're having about discipleship essentials. A few months ago, my mother sent me this picture of a tree. It's in the front yard of the former home of my maternal grandparents. The story that my grandmother used to tell was that I planted that tree when I was very young. I have a faint memory of digging in the red Georgia clay of her front yard with a spoon. I remember feeling angry that the tree was growing so much faster and taller than I was. Now, I don't know if those are real memories that belong to me or if it's just my imagination working in the memories of my grandmother as she told that story. But seeing that picture stirred my soul in an unexpected way. It was really thought-provoking to see something that I had set in motion a long time ago, something that's nearly as old as I am. I had no idea what that tree would become when I dug in the dirt that day. I was probably just playing around as little boys do. But 5 decades later, a tree stands in that spot, and I can't help but wonder, what has been the story of that tree? I only had a very small part in that tree's story. It's been nurtured for 50 years by sunshine and soil. It's been watered by rain and mist. It has survived wind, snow, ice, and drought. It's endured human activity and human neglect, and still it stands there, though it's clearly been bent and bruised through the decades. What's the story of that tree, I wonder? And what's the story of you? And what's the story of me? You know, there's never just one story that shapes a person's life. Many of the stories that shape us are stories given to us. The moment we're born, we inherit a multitude of stories that began with other people. The stories of our fathers, the stories of our mothers, the stories of our grandparents and great-grandparents, the stories of the nation and the culture we are born into. All of these stories are handed to us without our asking, whether we want them or not. We get to live with them. We have to live with them for good and for ill. Some of these stories are revealed in the ways we were nurtured, whether we were taught by example to express ourselves or to keep quiet, to be cheerful or to be critical, to enter gladly into conflict or to avoid conflict as much as possible. Some of the stories that shape us come to us in our nature through our DNA, whether we'll be athletic or if we'll be good at math, whether we'll be tall or short, thin or round, and how we'll manage all the ramifications of our size and shape. Some of the stories that shape us are given to us by the choices that other people make, like an elementary school teacher who, through her kindness, turned a boy who hated school into a boy who loved school. Or the factory on the coast of an Asian nation that flooded the nearby seawater with mercury, causing horrific birth defects in the children of those who ate the fish. Some of the stories that shape us are simply accidents, unforeseen circumstances that bring us pain and change our course. And to loosely paraphrase the bumper sticker, stuff happens, and we have to live with the stuff that happened. Thankfully, God works redemptively and graciously in these accidental stories, but that doesn't always make them easy to live with. The stories that are given to us, we don't choose them, but we do live with them and in them. They may be positive, they may be negative. They may feel like a blessing, they may feel like a curse. And whatever they are, they have a powerful influence in shaping our lives. They are, in a sense, like the roots of a tree. But there is another story, one that is at least as powerful and maybe even more powerful. And that's the story we tell ourselves about the stories we've been given. John Bramblett is an internationally renowned artist who lives in Denton, Texas. His paintings are sold around the world. He's been interviewed on TV and in print in several countries. He has designed artwork for magazine covers and major film productions. His work appears in murals on several buildings in Dallas. But John Bramblett was given a story. John Bramblett is blind. He lost his vision in 2001 from complications with epilepsy and Lyme's disease. He had always enjoyed creative expression and even wanted to teach creative writing, but he found himself feeling depressed and alone, cut off from the people he loved, cut off from creativity. Eventually, and surprisingly, he discovered painting of all things. It didn't come quickly or easily. After all, he first had to learn how to use a cane and how to read Braille. But in time, he learned how to tell the difference between colors by how the paint felt on his fingertips. He uses raised lines on a canvas and the different textures on a building to find his way around. He paints amazing portraits of people that he has never seen. He literally paints by feel and not by sight. He chose a story to tell himself about the story he had been given. And that story opened up amazing possibilities. A blind man became a world-famous painter. Sometimes we tell ourselves stories that are life-giving. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we can't. I want to tell you a story about a grandfather and a grandson. I'll tell the story as quickly as I can, but it's a complicated life and death story. I'll call the grandfather in this story Mitch. Mitch was the first child of 3 in his family. His parents recognized early in his life that he was different from other kids. It was especially clear once child number 2 awkward enough in social interactions that people thought he was rude. Today, he might have been politely classified as exceptional, but his relatives and family friends just labeled him as weird. As a teenager and as a young adult, Mitch alternated between being stubbornly independent and needing to be taken. His education later affected his work. He would engage, then run away, back and forth, back and forth. Somehow, Mitch wound up in the Army. And whether he had chosen it or had it chosen for him, I don't know. What I do know is that neither Mitch nor the Army were altogether happy with the arrangement. When Mitch came back home, he brought a wife named Sarah, a woman from a Middle Eastern country, from a very different culture and religious tradition than Mitch had known back home in his small, rural Georgia town. Sarah was superb at rules and boundaries. She was able to provide the structure that Mitch needed, but with a softer touch than the Army. To an outside observer, it wasn't always wife or a surrogate mother, but Mitch seemed to settle down in a way he never had before. In time, Mitch and Sarah had 2 daughters. Julia and Angela became a much-loved source of joy for Mitch's parents. Finally, it seemed they could relax and stop worrying about their oldest son. But soon it became apparent that not all was well in paradise. Mitch returned to the pattern that he had exhibited prior to marriage, alternating between responsibility and irresponsibility. He would work and provide for his family for a while, and then he would literally run back home to Mama for weeks at a time. Back and forth he went. Needless to say, it wasn't an ideal childhood for Julia and Angela. Sometimes their father was home with all of his quirks, and sometimes their father was gone, leaving Sarah functioning as a single parent, and a single parent who really didn't fit comfortably in rural Georgia. The girls began to choose different paths as they entered adolescence. Angela excelled in school and went on to succeed in her career. Julia embraced the spirit of a rebel. his mental health vacations, 8-year-old Dylan said to his grandmother, Sarah, that he never should have been born. 8 years old. Far too young to feel that kind of despair. Needed a different story than the story he was telling himself. Dylan needed to know that Dylan still wonders where his mother is. He knows stories that we are given. Vital and alive and fruitful. A member of our global outreach team, our GO team, recently reminded me of the importance of that word fruitful. She said that fruitfulness is for the sake of others, not self. And I thought she made a great point. A fruitful tree feeds other creatures with its fruit, not itself. I learned in middle school biology that the seeds in a fruit enable a tree or a plant to replicate itself. But that's too a part of God's design. The more a fruitful tree replicates, the more the other creatures get to eat. In fact, I would argue that fruitfulness is God's definition of success. Not fame, not power, not security, not wealth, but the sake of others. It's true that being in God's story has its benefits for us. The Psalm says, the law of the Lord makes them happy. But I contend that God's goal is not simply our happiness, it's our fruitfulness. They are like trees that produce fruit in season. William Temple, the Archbishop of Canterbury from 1942 to 1944, once offered a quote that became famous. The church is the only organization that does not exist for itself, but for those who live outside of it. Coming together in a faith community is an essential part of our journey with God. But we come together in order that we might go out again. God's design is that we plant roots and we bear fruit. It's not one or the other. It's both. Pastor Shannon has some information for us about the next step that we can take.
Hey, church. We hope that you are feeling encouraged and challenged during this series. We truly believe that God uses each of us to impact His kingdom when we show up in the lives of others over time. If God is leading you to respond, we want to help connect you with an opportunity to serve. So let's do it. Go ahead and grab your phone, open a new text message, and type in the number 770-575-5586 and text Over time, all one word, lower, uppercase, doesn't matter, you'll receive a link that is going to ask you a few questions. They're simple: your name, email, and phone number. The last question will ask you about which Next Steps gathering you are able to attend. We have 3 options: an on-campus that happens at 5 p.m. on June 27th, an online that happens on June 23rd, and another option where we can contact you directly. God is moving at PTC UMC, and He is calling each of us to take the next step to respond. We can't wait to see what God does in the lives of others through you over time.